few comments and then kind of guiding into, I guess, what I'd like to see based on so much community feedback and going through numbers. It seems going through the numbers that, you know, you start to see patterns and trends, and that's a good thing because it helps you make decisions by predicting moving forward. And the pattern I see is that when we budget our federal and state funds too low, too conservatively, it causes us to require a higher level of local taxes to kind of make up that part of the equation. And then as the year progresses, the federal and state money comes in, and we're seeing it come in at a higher amount than budgeted consistently, which means that we use that first, and then that money we collected from local taxes ends up being kind of extra, and then that is where I'm seeing as the reason why our fund balance is building up. In addition to, kind of, I think our district has talked about, the state has changed the QBE model a little bit, and that's also contributed to additional funds. So my goal really is to create a budget that puts our local tax revenue at no more than 3% inflation rate, kind of tying it to inflation rate, yet still meets the needs of our school and takes care of our teachers. And I just wanna ask, is this a goal that we all are moving towards? To kind of tie our local tax revenue to inflation as a goal?
No, not me.
Okay, I mean, it's just a question to kind of see, are we all trying to go to the same place? Because I do think it kind of affects how we have those discussions of how to get where we're going if we're all going to different places. But I'll just put that out, but that's.
Well, you're talking about tying our revenues to solely to inflation.
Well, one piece of
Not
it.
regard to the expenses side of the equation.
So one piece of it, the kind of the local tax, so if our tax digest expands 5% and inflation is 3%, then I would still try to tie it to inflation as a sustainable budgeting model, similar to what we talked about.
What if that's not enough to cover our expenses?
And that's where, you know, I kind of dive into the second part of what I'm looking for this year and where I think we actually can do all of this. And for this year, we figured for our budget, our local property tax portion of the budget listed under the local sources amount is within it. I think Mr. Casada had given the number of $138,640,000. So within that local sources amount, $138.6 million is coming from the property tax, and that we came up with that number as a 5% increase based on 3% inflation and 2% growth, right? And so within our current number, our previous number was $132 million. So my goal is I would like to, instead of do that 5%, I would like to do a 3% to match inflation, which would total $135,999,190. So essentially $136 million. So what I'm asking for is I would like to reduce the local property tax portion within that local sources amount by $3 million, and to make that local source amount be $154,655,000, and then make up that $3 million difference in other categories of revenues. And I think there are a number of ways to do that. Now, with us going to a 3.3% salary, 3.5% salary increase, it would be a wash, right? But even if we, you know, wanted to talk about that as a separate item, I still think, based on what I'm seeing from our state amounts alone, we're consistently over the last few years receiving approximately 5% more state funds than we budgeted based on what we're receiving from the state. For example, last year we budgeted $189 million and actually received $198 million, which is an additional $9 million above what we budgeted. And we're seeing this kind of consistently over time. So I would propose that we increase the state sources budget maybe by somewhere around 2%, which is very conservative from the trend of 5%. And that would equate to actually $4.4 million. So we could even increase it less and make up that $3 million from the state side just by following kind of what our trends are. So that's one way I see it making it up. Yeah.
I think, you know, the estimate of our state revenues is an estimate from our CFO and his department as to what we can reasonably anticipate. And so I would be very wary about just arbitrarily increasing it because we got it before. Never know what could happen. And I think the reason that, we end up with more money each year is because our state and federal revenues, fortunately, have been higher than we have budgeted for. Now, I say all that to lead into this, that, on the revenue side, there's a lot more mystery or a lot more guesswork on what we're gonna bring in than on the expense side. And we do have the ability, once we get the tax digest back, and once we figure out, what those numbers are, we can lower that revenue amount at that time when we discuss the village rates. So it would be a positive, it would be a very positive budget amendment that I would love to be able to pass. So, that's what I would say to that.
I mean, you're right, we could always amend it later, I feel like it's kind of it signals of.
We have the information.
Right, and I understand that there's, we talk about COVID, federal funds and state funds, there's a big difference, but then again, a few years after COVID, all the CARES money came in and it skyrocketed. So, it seems to be very up and down, and that's why I do understand we have to be conservative, but at the same time, I feel like when we're too conservative and then go into local taxpayers and saying, hey, we need to, like have a 9% increase or an 11% increase, and then it ends up being extra, and then we put in the funds and then come back later and say, hey, we gotta spend this fund balance. I feel like we're too conservative to the point that it hurts, but even more, it hurts because in the fund balance, we can't really use that to hire teachers as a continual operating expense. We can use it kind of for one-time things. So I'm thinking if we can use all this really great data that we have and maybe just budge slightly less conservatively, but well within what we're seeing the trends are, that could nudge it a little bit in the direction of putting property taxes at an inflationary model, which I feel is far more sustainable than a market model, which we had a lot of these discussions at 581 time. But really, it's just if we can accurately budget that money as it's coming in, we can use it for hiring teachers in a long-term sustainable way and really giving it to student support. So, and I would say even if we're not comfortable with doing it from the state side, there's still, I think it's a good point to say what proportion are we budgeting our interest in? There's another way. I would just ask, and because we have such a fund balance, I do feel like this is maybe the year to try it. I'm just asking for $3 million off our local sources and to give that a try and see what that looks like come millage rate time. Would you guys be willing to do that, to bring up property?
I can address a few of those comments on both sides a little bit. Number one, on and Alex chime in on this too, but on the capital side, there's some pretty strict requirements, and so when you see interest from the capital, it's got to stay there. We can't move that out. We don't pick where that money's going. And you'll recall that a couple of years ago, and this is a really huge kudos to Mr. Casado and some of the folks that worked on our bond fund. We were able to find a way. There's something called arbitrage there, where all of the interest that you receive that's above a certain point, you have to pay back, which would have cost us somewhere between $2 and $3 million. And at that time, you'll recall interest rates spiked pretty high. And so we were able to adjust that and transfer the money to a different fund through the recommendation of the finance department, save $2 to $3 million, and that was back to the taxpayer. So on the interest side, it's a very good point, but we have to leave it in that fund also. But we're very fortunate we were able to do that. And on the capital side, it really is a savings to the taxpayer because as the bonds are sold and the bond grows, there's a necessary limit that you have to pay back over time, and with that, we have seen just the last couple of years the ability without raising a debt service millage by doing some of these transfers. So you would have locked in a debt service millage possibly to 2037 or beyond, where you didn't have to do that because we were able to transfer some money from the general fund. So, and at that time, that was the board's decision, and there was a lot of discussion that went on. I mean, obviously, if we were to recommend that again, that would be another discussion. But it is a very fiscally conservative move because you're limiting a rise in millage rates around debt service, of which would be set by the board and isn't really open for public discussion. That's a set based on the need. We're able to do it while there is public discussion. So I think that's a really good point. And the last point I think that's important to make, and maybe Ms. Cristado, if I'm misrepresenting anything, say this, but the last 3 years has been an anomaly in the state of Georgia. State revenues, and if you've read anything from the state at every level, and a little bit it's gone back to the taxpayers, but for the most part, the state has spent it across the state, with some larger portions going to the school district. But that also came with extremely high increases in expenditures. That's gonna roll back around to get us in about 2 to 3 years. And we're not gonna continue to see, probably, I don't know for sure, the increase, because we've never seen it before, except for the last 3 years. And Mr. Cristado, you wanna just chime in on that? Because I mean, those are pretty important points.
I agree. I think I agree with everything you said as it relates to the last, since COVID. I mean, it has just been an unpredictable anomaly. That's a good term I would use when it comes to state funds. That 15.1 million I mentioned earlier, we didn't know when they were gonna give it back. I mean, it took forever for, in 08, 09, for the state to give back what they call an austerity reduction. That's their fancy term for it. They ended up doing it within 2 years. So the changes in the amended budget at the state level over the last 3 or 4 years have often come with additional money for school districts. We're thankful for that. I don't know, to your point, Dr. Flint, that we will continue to see that into the future, although it is hard to tell. It's very hard to tell.
We also don't know what the ramifications of House Bill 268 are gonna be. We don't have those budgeted because we don't know what they're gonna be. But that's gonna be sometime this year, or at least part of it will be sometime this year, will it not? So, and I think it would be helpful too, and I have to remind myself of this, we look at the fund balance, we see one amount printed, but that's not one pot of money. That's actually several pots of money added together to get one total. And there are restrictions on how those different pots of money can be spent. So it's not like when you look at your bank statement, you look at the total and then you know how much money you have to spend, because not all that money is spendable. And I think it's important also to remember that the fund balance all benefits the taxpayer. Whether we're using it for 2 to 3 months of expenditures in hard times, or whether we're using it for the debt service, or whether we're using it and it helps us get a higher credit rating and we get a lower rate of interest. I mean, it benefits the taxpayer, all of it in different ways, but it's all beneficial. So.
I do think it's important, again, when the balanced idea, I certainly acknowledge that there's unpredictability with the state and federal, and even local to some extent. But I think it's important for us to remember that when the school district is experiencing these dry ups of money, so are the taxpayers. So during COVID, when we were worried about our payroll, taxpayers were worried about supporting their family. And so I do think we need to do a balanced approach, and that's where my solution to this is really to get into a budgetary philosophy, if you will, that we're going to tie our school district operations, our revenues and expenditures towards an inflationary model with the idea that the inflation and troubles and ups and downs and unpredictabilities we're experiencing, so are the taxpayers. It's just that they don't have a choice. They have to pay their, property taxes, but yet they still have to provide for their families as well. So I think it would just be a good model to move to, and that model applied to this year is asking for $3 million off of a particular category of revenue, which really, based on the change that Mr. Deeple suggested with teachers' pays, kind of is a wash, but it gets us to that budgetary model that starts linking it property inflation, plus that kind of prepares us for the market that might level out or might not be so, you know, we are blessed with where it is, but I think we should always be looking on the horizon to say, okay, it won't stay this way, so how can we kind of get into a more stable, predictable model? And then I would add, I would even be open to, with the board's support, that if we did the 3.5% raise, maybe supplementing that with a one-time stipend from the fund balance, since we do seem to have above 3 months worth. And that would be what, about $4.5 million for 2% one-time stipend, I think, according to that chart.
It would be that chart less the two.
Okay, so I just did a rough calculation, I had about $4.5 million, that's just a very small amount to take from the fund balance, but at least that's going towards the teachers, so I would maybe suggest, along with the 3.5%, which reduces then the expenditures by about $4 million, having a $3 million decrease from the revenues from the property tax side. That still puts us ahead $1 million, and maybe balancing it with a kind of a hybrid model this year for the teachers, where we add a 2% stipend to kind of help alleviate that 3.5%. Those are just my overall comments, for where I think I would like to see us go for that. And then I did have just a few minor comments on that needs list. For the, I also think paraprofessionals are so important. I know that every person we hire is a long-term expenditure and a long-term commitment. And so I was thinking between, I know everything is a need, of course, but personally, if I had a choice, I would try to hire the 6 paraprofessionals and hold off on the 2 student advocacy specialists. My reasons for that is,
We have to.
I was just gonna say, I don't think we have to do it this year. Is that state?
That came from House Bill 268.
Right.
And we may end up getting that, at least a portion of that paid for. We're hoping that, but as Ms. Teasley said, there's gonna be a number of other expenses that we're gonna have to kind of come back around to deal with some of that. So we think that's pretty much gonna level out once we find out what they're gonna fund for that. But yeah, it's, there's gonna be and the challenge is some of the requirements around the law and who would do those. We don't have staff that would do the required research and record keeping for those positions, and there's a lot there. And so that's why it would be very difficult. I would agree, I think we've heard, you know, we try to put as much of our funding back into the local school every time. But a lot of these things, we can't, for example, implement the physical security without the people to help put it in, and some of that's gonna be a required, it's just required from the state level. And so Mr. Van Meter, I know, you know, has his work cut out for him, even with one, but that's where we are.
Dr. Flynn, I think you and I, when we talked about this, and I thank y'all for answering questions that I've asked. The 18 through 24, you know, my wish list is always big and always say, can we do everything? Can we do everything? What is your purpose of having the 18 through 24? Those things we're going to try to add in over the years that we might not be able to do this year, but these are what we know we need and that we plan to look, you know.
I think it gives a couple of things. Number one, we had discussions about it, both at the board and at the cabinet level. We put a funding next to it so we know, as we talk about it in the future, what it could cost. No doubt next year, when we get to this point, 18 through 24 is not gonna become 1 through whatever, you know, it's gonna be reset based on all the needs that we have next year. So, but I do think, you know, anytime we're discussing some of these, it's important to see the value. A good example here is the counselor to student ratio. So we heard this play out under the Golden Dome with our legislators. It was a good discussion on decreasing that. And over the last couple of years, you know, they've put a couple of $1 million there. But for us, that accounts to less than 1 position if you spread it across the entire state. And so some of the time when you hear things at the state level, how it plays out here is very different. And so it's important for us to put a number value there. This is really what it would cost us if we were gonna get to that point. So that's really why we have some of those.
I feel like I mean, I think think everything on this list is, you know, can be well justified as a need, but I really wanna kind of shift our focus into, one, hiring someone it's a long-term commitment and it's an exponential, a long-term commitment and an exponential commitment as far as each year they work becomes, you know, more expensive than the last year. So I think, I don't have to, you know, probably even say it, but every person we hire, we really need to think long-term. And if we're hiring someone to put in these systems, I would just ask, is that you know, try to see other options. Is it something we could hire a contractor for to where they're installed and then we don't have that long-term, position behind it? I mean, I don't know, that's not my realm, but I'm trying to put out ideas to really start sending a message to, I mean, I look at student instruction numbers, which is where most of, I think, our budget goes to for teachers and things like that, and it goes up 5% a year over the last few years. And then I look at, you know, the general administration budget, and it's gone up somewhere around 30% per year for the last few years. And I know people have brought that up in the public of, hey, why are administration costs seem to be jumping at a higher cost than our teachers are getting hired? And I think it's a valid point, because that's kind of what these numbers seem to be saying. And so I would really like to see the focus go on, after we've hired those 6 paraprofessionals, after we've hired that K-7 math specialist, then we see what's left in the budget for those 2 student advocacy specialists. And waiting a year not only technically saves us money, but I do hear a lot, and I'm kind of watching on my own, but I am seeing a lot of conversations about 268 having some legal challenges to it. It really, the way it's written, in a lot of ways, violates FERPA from what I'm hearing. That might be challenged, and it seems that even from a civil rights perspective, it really kind of, I won't say targets, but disproportionately seems to reflect minority students and how it reports student behavior. So I see so many concerns about it. It's new. I think there's a lot of unknowns. Maybe the state's gonna cover it. Maybe that's something we could put off 1 more year so that we could hire those paraprofessionals that could really help those teachers out now. Because if there's one thing I've heard for years now, it's paraprofessionals are so important to have in the classroom. And I still remember my daughter's kindergarten teacher, when I first met her at open house night, and her saying, yeah, I actually have a paraprofessional. And she was so excited. They had been together for years, and that really contributed to a successful experience that directly impacted the students in that class every single year. So I mean, again, I have to trust the school that you know your needs, and I defer to that, but I would just say my perspective is put those paraprofessionals and that K-7 math specialist above positions we don't necessarily need just yet, and maybe look for alternatives for how to get those systems in if they can be had.
Now might be a good time to give us a refresher on how the budget is actually formed and who has input to get us to this point, to identify the budget needs, and how that starts in January, and who has input into that process.
Well, it does go on all year long. I mean, we started in earnest in January, obviously, but it's something that we look at continuously. And I don't know that any of us would disagree on certain positions, and I, for one, have been a huge proponent of paraprofessionals. Our district has if we look at it across per pupil basis, many more than other school districts, which we're very blessed to have, because they're a huge support. Unfortunately, the state doesn't see it that way. They have been removing the funding for almost all of the number that we have, but all of the cost in benefits around insurance in those positions. So it creates a unique challenge for local school districts where it increases the cost so dramatically on a position where, if we look at the pay and the few that we get reimbursed from the state, it becomes a challenge for funding that for future years. That's a state decision, though, and has created a challenge at the school and district level for sure. But we are fortunate we've been able to hold on to the ones we have, and possibly, over the next couple of years we'll be able to add some.
But I mean, I don't want anybody to think that this list was generated in this building.
Right, yeah, no, we get input from every school, and as we stated, you know, this is a unique year on our weighted staffing formula. We've talked about that a number of times, at board meetings. These are the things to be really self-sustaining with the money that's coming from the state, it is extremely important that we staff and we schedule students for the student needs, number one, for what they need, and then two, so we're funded appropriately at the state level. Because when we talk about 60%, which is a large percent of our budget coming at the state level, we've got to get that funding for our people from the state first. Now, we can add some here, but we also want to make sure that that's a reimbursable amount. It's also like on our building program, we don't want to build something necessarily unless we just have to have it, unless it qualifies for state reimbursement on funding. Same thing for buses. The years that we buy those are when we get the state money. So I think you see that and the adjustments in our budget based on the factors of how much we're going to be able to get from the state also. So it's a very good point, Ms. Teasley.
Can we do Kate, because Alan mentioned this slide, can we look at that later on? Like, can that be something done anytime, mid-year? I think we've done that in the past, where we can look at things after everything comes in the fall, we could look at stipend.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can even adjust the budget after, when the village comes in. I mean, it's probably not best practice to just do that every time, because you want people to know what's coming and know what to expect. Be able to hire, if you wait until that point in time, you're at the beginning of the school year, most of the staff has been hired. It becomes a real challenge to hire the most qualified that are out there, that today you're allowing the school system to go ahead and hire, which is a huge benefit to us for being able to get the most qualified people that are available.
So I would like to see, I think, I've appreciated this discussion. I know we've had a lot of emails back and forth with numbers, and the amount of information I feel that I've looked at and processed in the last week and a half, I think we all need some Tylenol to go around, right? But I would just say, given this vast amount of information and that we're, open to the possibility of adjusting the budget and maybe adding a stipend, I would almost just ask that we delay tentatively approving it so that we could, on Tuesday when we get together, I would like to just see what a budget would look like with that $3 million reduced from the revenue, with, the 3.5% teacher raise, with the stipend reduced from our fund balance, to kind of balance out the fact that it's only 3.5% raise, which is lower than 5%. Also, perhaps putting in paraprofessionals or math specialists or both. I would like to see that budget, because I think when we see it, maybe we could talk about if it's really possible, because ultimately, as a board, we take all of this input, and then our budget reflects our philosophies and our priorities, because our names are on that budget when we vote for it. And I want to signal that our priorities are for our teachers and students in the classrooms, and our priorities are to make sure we balance our needs of the school district and our experiences and the volatility with the needs of the taxpayers, who are also experiencing the same volatility, except they're telling their kids, no, you can't take ballet, you can't go out to ice cream, because the expenses and inflation have just taken its toll on the family. And there's just much to consider, so I would just ask that maybe we do one more meeting before we tentatively adopt something tonight, just to kind of see what those numbers would look like.
How does 3 through 17 not support teachers in the schools? I'm just a little confused. We're adding nurses to have more days so they can plan and be prepared. We're having more of our safety officers be available to get the schools ready for teachers so they don't have to do that. We've got a fine arts lead for the CTAE. We've got a supplement going to the yearbook and chorus, who do extra hours to get those programs going. Athletic supplements for our athletic coaches, or coaches who spend many hours outside of what is expected. Lead teachers, I just don't understand how 3 through 17 doesn't support. I would love to have 18 through 24, but I think 3 through 17 does support our school systems. And from what I've heard from my community, this is addressing some of those needs as well for children or students who need a nurse, or,
I think, Ms. Allen is probably just realizing, because when you see it printed, it's a whole lot more, that there are unlimited needs for supporting students and providing instruction. If left up to me, as a retired teacher, we would fund 1 through 24. We really wouldn't care about what the total figure was. But unfortunately, and as much as I dislike that number, and it's been bannered around back in the days of elected school superintendents, how much or how little we spend per student, it is a number that keeps people like me tuned into reality. Because I would spend all of our money hiring teachers, hiring security officers, doing everything on this list and more. But we can't do that realistically, okay? And because of our roles here as trustees of the school system, we have hired very competent people to put this budget together and tell us what we need most. And so I feel comfortable voting on their recommendations.
I'll also point out this, tentative approval is just that, tentative. It sends a message, to the community that we're getting close. That doesn't mean you can't, that doesn't mean we can't make adjustments for final approval. So, you know, for purposes of, you know, allowing our front office and our administrators to move forward, and for us to move forward, I think we've, debated the issue enough, and so, what we plan. Sure, I was just gonna finish up by just saying that, you know, once we finish this, we'll have a second meeting with regard to that. Go ahead.
You know, Ms. Allen posed a question to us, and we'd like to see a move in the direction of a 3%, you know, budget based on inflation. I would love that, I love that idea. I mean, each component of that. But I feel like our area really isn't benefiting from, commercial tax revenues. And that's a big piece that, I mean, if you read the news, I think we're well positioned to see that, be in that position to do that, and I think it is a direction we should be moving towards. But there's some uncertainty without that commercial tax revenue that other counties enjoy. I hope that we're sitting up here in a couple of years and saying, wow, this is a nice influx of cash that we can accomplish all of these 20, 30 items, let's add some more, right? You know, would I like to see our budgeted revenues, more in line with what actuals are versus what we budgeted? Absolutely. When you look at the figures throughout the last 5 years, particularly 4, there was 1 year in there, it was a little different, which, I think makes the argument for maybe keeping a little bit higher. 4% seems like the magic number for me, as sort of a compromise and moving in the direction of 3%. But my predecessor sitting out here, David Hall, who went through COVID. You guys went through COVID. You went through 2008 up here on the board, some of you did, and the economic downturn. So, you know, I think that I play off of some of the wisdom that's here and some of the wisdom out here and over here that have put so much time in putting this budget together. There's 5% there for a reason, and I think I need to have some faith in that. But I am pointing out I would like 4% for whatever reason in my mind feels like the nice compromise. I'm not gonna stake my flag on that, but I would like to see that work. I don't like seeing teachers not paid, maybe what they should be paid. We try to get feedback from the public and we try to share it. I caution against micromanagement and saying this priority over another priority and telling the board office what to do and these people what to do, you know, because they do this, they're dug in day out. Our job is to give you what we're hearing out there in the public, and you hopefully are taking that and saying, oh wait, maybe we need to make some judgments on paraprofessionals. I mean, hopefully you're hearing that, maybe we come to that conclusion before this next meeting, I don't know. But I wanted to answer that question because I do think we should try to be moving that direction. You know, I don't know that we've ever had a delayed tax digest, have we, in our district? I mean, that is a fear factor. You said we're not here to fear factors. Like, that is a possibility, right? I guess it could happen. We do need to protect our bond ratings. I don't think there's any, you know, denying that. So I think we need, my opinion is that we need to do our work come the right time. And I plan on really pushing hard to roll that. I'm gonna say it right here. I know that I'm not in a position, we haven't seen the revenues come in, but I'd like to be able to see us really make this work where we can do some rollback. Then, and do our work then. No, I mean, roll back.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Appreciate your
I
comments.
just wanted to clarify one thing, that I do agree with Christie that 2 through 17 support students, just to be clear, I'm not trying to say they don't. I would think there's nobody our school hires that doesn't support students in one way or another, otherwise why are we bringing them into the school district? But that said, I do feel that we need to really look and see what's our primary purpose. We had a great discussion at our GSBA leadership training that school's primary purpose has grown so much with what we are expected to do, and we are stretched so thin that sometimes we lose track of what our true mission is, and everyone, the teachers kind of get exhausted, and it goes back to our true mission of educating students. And so when I look at paraprofessionals, they're the ones who are side by side with the kindergartner, teaching them to sound out letters. I mean, that's a direct impact on that child learning to read or count. I look at a math specialist, K through 7. I think the elementary years are so fundamental, especially that K through 2, where you're really learning to read. And to have somebody side by side with you, or a specialist working with you, getting those, seeing your gaps and where you're not understanding that type of math, and bridging those gaps at the earliest phase. I feel like an investment there is where we're really gonna see those dividends in our children's true education, their ability to read and write. And so that's where, when I say supporting students, I guess I just mean more like a hands-on, in the classroom fashion. And that's where kind of my mind is at the K through 7 math specialist and the paraprofessional, that I think it would speak volumes to the community if we did put those in the top 17, especially because, you know, we do have two state positions that have a lot of questions around them, and maybe depending on, I feel like with the team we have, I would like to see a budget that incorporates all of this feedback and use that as a talking point before we move on to tentatively approving it. Because if we intend to make changes, why tentatively approve something tonight is really where my mind is at. So that's just what I would like to see. I'd like to see these ideas, minus $3 million up top, potentially a little bit from state, potentially a little bit from, you know, wherever we're getting the money to do these transfers from the general fund, which was, I think, $58 million over the last few years. Wherever that money's coming from, let's find $3 million somewhere and take it from the local. And at the same time, if we want to save on the 3.5%, let's put a stipend in there to kind of soften that and make sure we send a message to teachers, we do value you. Just, we might have to do it in a hybrid, interesting way this year. That's what I'd like to do.
Dr. Flynn, I have two questions. We are funded for our kindergarten paraprofessionals, correct?
Most of them, yeah. We have
We
extras.
have one in every kindergarten, or how are we doing there? I'm sorry to ask that
I'd
without.
have to look at the
Okay.
numbers there.
They are saying
That's
yes
the only
across the
paraprofessional
table.
that is funded, correct?
But yes, kindergarten paraprofessionals,
The
it
only
depends
one
on the,
that's funded from
it
the
depends on
state.
the, there's 2 different models you can
Okay.
staff a student ratio for kindergarten. But my understanding from what they're saying is we choose the model that always has the para, and it's funded at the kindergarten.
At the kindergarten level,
Yes.
correct, that's the only one that, okay, so, okay, the last thing is the K through 7 math specialist, that's one person. How would we utilize that one person? I mean,
Right.
because that's a big role, so that's why it's 220 days, correct?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, because I just had a discussion about it with some of the folks earlier today about how we're gonna be, if we don't fund it, we're gonna be using, as somebody mentioned, some consultants to do some of that work. Obviously, we wouldn't put anything on that list if it wasn't important, right? So
Correct.
I can argue the importance of all of these, some of them are really around requirements, and administration, don't forget, we are the lowest, bar one school district in the state of Georgia on general administration costs. You don't get any lower.
We're not top heavy,
It's not even not top heavy. There's, but the people in this room are the ones that are doing that, and then we're getting the schools to give us that feedback. You're seeing a direct flow through into the classroom as much as we can. I think everybody in this room keeps one foot in the classroom.
just to put a bow on this, I want a little clarification. So the number 4 on the list is sped paraprofessionals, it's not just paraprofessional. Is that what you're referring to, or you're referring to all paraprofessionals?
I was looking at item number 24 for 186,000.
Yeah, that's for sped paraprofessionals.
Okay, well, I mean,
Okay.
from what I've heard from special ed, I
Yeah.
still stand by it for different reasons, but I feel the feedback has been about the same for.
And remember this year with the, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but this year with the reorganization there, I mean, I think some of the things we heard, we are addressing that. We've spent a lot of time, on the model. We're gonna come back next year, there'll be more, but you don't wanna burden the changes that we already have. There's a lot of work that's gone into the specialists that we have, and some of the work into specializing in certain areas. And so once we get through that first year, I have no doubt there's gonna be a lot more that are gonna come out as needs, and it could come out, throughout the year as well. And that may be, if there is some budget amendments, a place we wanna talk about it. But we also have to get our people trained and in those positions first. So change management is something I think many of us specialize in. We're not looking for 1 year. This is a 5 to 10 year process. We didn't create just a 5-year strategic plan. We were looking at 10. We wrote it down for 5.
Well, I make a motion to adjourn.
All right, there's a motion to adjourn, we have a second?
Seriously, with Mr. Allen off in the room, that's the best you can do? Second?
All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and have our second meeting to entertain a motion to tentatively approve